Ys. A video game series that means so much to me, but what is Ys? I didn't discover the Ys series until about 2012 when Xseed Games released an English localization of Ys Origin onto Steam. I saw it on the storefront and thought, what the hell is Wise? And then I watched the trailer and oh my god, I heard it. Falcom sound team JDK's masterclass of musicians going to absolute town on the opening theme. But 2012 was only my introduction to the Ys series. Ys is actually one of the longest running JRPG series, and second only to Final Fantasy for the number of entries within the same series. It all started in 1987 when Ys, Ancient Ys Vanished, was released on NEC's PC-88 system. You play as series protagonist Adult Christian, an adventurer to the core. There's nothing he loves more than adventure, and the premise for each game is that we as the player are reading a book of Adol's adventures. Somehow, Adol just keeps ending up somewhere that's in peril, and he is the hero that attempts to restore peace. Not because he really cares about the well-being of the people he meets, but just so he can write a sick journal entry about how sick and how cool he is. Dear Journal, today I did this sick jump off of a cliff, and I totally nailed this demon below me in the head. It was so sick. The series has an overarching lore which revolves around the titular Ys, an ancient land which holds a magic artifact, the Black Pearl, that humans essentially overused, causing demons to spawn. The goddesses and priests of Ys used what magic remained to raise a segment of Ys into the sky to escape the demons below, and the demons responded by building a tower to try and reach the island. The lore's been fleshed out in recent years, and remakes have started retconning lore into older games, making them connect even better. There have been ports of the games to almost every system, plus remakes and reimaginings. I personally would say that there are 13 distinct mainline Ys games, with the 14th, Ys 10 Nordics, due to release sometime this year in 2023, at least in Japan. Ys has, to this day, one of the most unique combat systems that no other game, outside of the indie series Faerun, has ever really tried to replicate, and fans refer to it as bump combat. You literally just bump directly into enemies, and you really have to play it to understand just how fun that can be. They haven't feared from changing the combat either, and there are three main eras of Ys combat. There's the iconic bump combat from Ys 1, 2, and 4, the more dungeon crawling high speed, almost hack and slash from Ys 6 Napishtim, Felghana, and Ys Origin, and the current active party swapping that we have today, which started from Ys 7, Memories of Celceta, Ys 8, Lacrimosa of Dana, and Ys 9, Monstrum Nox. Alongside the speedy action combat, the other biggest defining feature of the Ys series is the music. Every game has an outstanding soundtrack. Almost every game has an outstanding soundtrack. I really believe that the Ys series has some of the greatest pieces of music used in video games ever. The soundtracks to the games sound like they came from an actual band, and that's because a lot of the time they did. The Falcom sound team regularly go on tours around Japan, not as a symphonic tribute to their video games, but just as a band. You can almost hear the passion of the musicians as you're playing the game. And with a game series as long running as Ys, the catalogue of songs is enormous. And they've made them readily available as well. You can just open up Spotify or I think most music applications and find the entire Falcom library of songs, which is really, really cool. Ys is an important series in video game history, but it's somehow remained fairly niche throughout the years, especially outside of Japan. This means that some games in the series have never seen releases in English, and the ones that have taken up to 6 years to be localized across. Which is something that hopefully changes in the future. I would love to live in a day where there's day and date worldwide releases of Ys games. And with series like Yakuza or Persona, kind of getting that in recent years with its popularity growing in the West, I'm a little hopeful. I still think Ys can become one of those series as well. But today, as someone who has now played every Ys video game, I will attempt to list my top 5. It was tough. Cuts had to be made. But first, some honorable mentions, which could just be me listing like literally every Ys game because there are none that I really dislike. Okay, Mask of Sun kind of sucks. But anyway, let's look at a couple standouts for me. The first honorable mention is to Ys 3, Wonders from Ys, especially the English Turbografx CD version.
Hey, Adolf! Smell that fresh sea breeze?
I have a soft spot for outliers in series, think Zelda 2. You know, they tried something different. They brought Ys into the 2D side-scrolling plane, and they did a pretty damn good job of it, I think. I can't think of the right word to describe the combat in the game. I want to say clunky, but I think that implies slow. So I'll go with clunky on crack. They made a 2D game, but they didn't want to lose the speed of Ys 1 and 2. Player feedback isn't the greatest, it's sometimes hard to know what you did right. And it's very easy to just over-level and face tank literally every enemy. But a couple of the boss fights, like if you're at the appropriate level, have distinct patterns that are fun to learn. The Turbografx version is the most important part here, because the music, voice acting, and graphics are what really make Ys 3 a spectacle worth the 6 or so hours of your time it takes to complete it. So if you're going through the Ys series, I urge you to avoid the Sega, NES, SNES, PS2 versions of the game. They're all fine, but the Turbografx is where the magic really lies. The second honorable mention is to Ys 7. To this day, 7 still has my favorite self-contained story of all the Ys games. And I can understand the people that call it ugly to look at and maybe skip it because of how it looks. But even though it's a bit cliche and somewhat predictable, I've never cared so much about the characters in an Ys game as I did in 7. It also marked the start of a new era for Ys, changing the combat style into what we currently have, the active party swapping. They've only refined the combat system from here, and 7 is definitely the weakest in that regard. And honestly, the current party-based combat is my least favorite out of the 3 main styles of Ys, yet still, Ys 7 just oozes with this Falcom charm that makes me like the game more and more every time I think about it. And who knows, give it enough time and maybe it will climb high enough to reach the top 5, but for now, it sits here in honorable mentions. Speaking of top 5, let's actually get into the numbers part. Now, remember that this is my rankings as of right now, and the distance that separates these is extremely slim. Just don't hold me to my word when tomorrow I say I actually like Ys 7 the best, okay? Number 5. Ys 9 Monstrum Nox. Ys 9 is chronologically the latest in the series, so we get to play as Adol as old as he's ever been. The game starts with Adol and his partner Dogi arriving in Roman-ruled Bolduc, home to an enormous prison system. Adol is immediately recognized and incarcerated in the prison under the belief that he is responsible for the disappearance of a Roman fleet in the ocean. We then play as Adol, break out of the prison, put on our emo kid disguise, and begin our adventure. Adol is granted a power to transform into a Monstrum, a power which a select few people around Bolduc have. It's this Monstrum power that makes Ys 9 so much fun to play. Ys 8 refined the combat so well compared to the previous entry, Memories of Celceta, that 9 didn't really need to touch the combat much to keep the game feeling great. Instead, they added a new layer of movement abilities tied to this Monstrum power. So Ys has always excelled at making getting from destination to destination fun in and of itself. Instant one-shot bumping enemies as you're walking back to town in Ys 1 is one of the most satisfying things in a video game. The series kind of lost this a bit when they moved to more traditional action RPG combat, but I think Ys 9 has brought back the fun of simply moving between locations. You essentially have a hookshot, a vertical climb, a glide, and a few more that just let you zip around areas with such speed. I also think they've made the non-adult party characters the most fun they've been to play as to date. The other party-based Ys games usually have me using adult almost exclusively, except for when I need a specific ability or damage type that another character offers. But in Ys 9, I spent a lot of time bouncing between characters even when it wasn't required. Particular standout was probably Doll. On top of all the fun stuff they added, Ys 9 is packed with fan service, and not of the anime titty kind. I mean, there's Ys 8 for that. Instead, it acts almost as a hub of lore for the series. The fan service is in constant references to the games that came before. You won't feel lost if you played this as your first Ys game, but if you play it after playing all the other games in this series, you'll notice and enjoy so many more aspects of the game. So as good as this game is to play, I recommend saving it to last to fully enjoy what makes it great. Number 4. Ys Origin. As I mentioned earlier, Ys Origin is where I was introduced to the series, and the game is incredible. It comes from the second era of Ys games, and it's the last one that uses that engine, meaning it's the most refined and an absolute blast to play. The game's a prequel to Ys 1 and 2, set 1,000 years in the past, and it's one of the most character-focused stories that the Ys series has had to date. I won't go into any spoilers because I think this is one of the most interesting games to play plot-wise, but the game lets you play from the perspective of different characters, and the character that you choose is the one that takes the initiative in the story. Even though you'll go through the same areas, fight the same enemies, and mostly the same bosses, each playthrough has vastly different character interactions and leads to a different ending, so you're rewarded for multiple playthroughs of the game, and honestly I recommend that more than anything. Ys Origin has some of the most memorable boss fights in the whole series. As always, the game checkpoints you at the start of boss encounters, so even though they're challenging, the high-speed action doesn't really ever stop, you're just straight back into it. And even on normal difficulty, the game is challenging and extremely fun. For my first playthrough, I played normal. It was my introduction to the Ys series, and it kicked my ass. It was so much fun while kicking my ass though. And now Nightmare is where the fun lies. I wouldn't recommend Nightmare playthrough as your first playthrough. The regular enemies in the dungeons are overtuned. It's most definitely a challenge mode, and the Nightmare difficulty essentially locks you out of one of the upgrade mechanics of the game, the SP system. So alongside getting XP and leveling up regularly, killing monsters drops little crystals called SP, which is a currency you can spend to like upgrade your character. The best upgrade in the game costs 500,000 SP, which isn't too difficult to get in a normal playthrough as strong enemies can drop thousands at a time, but the Nightmare difficulty caps every SP that drops to 1. Meaning that by the end of a Nightmare playthrough you can really only afford one of two of the like really cheaper upgrades. It makes for a fun challenge run, but as a first playthrough it would only be annoying. The music in Ys Origin is once again incredible. The new songs they made for the game will last with you, and even after spending hours on the same boss dying over and over again, I never got tired of hearing the same song. Number 3. Ys 4, Dawn of Ys. So, Falcom actually commissioned 2 different developers to make Ys 4. Tonkin House made Ys 4, Mask of the Sun for the Super Famicom, and Hudson Soft made Ys 4, Dawn of Ys for the PC Engine CD-ROM, and they both released within a month of each other in 1993. Neither game has ever seen an English release, so the only way to play these in English is through fan translations. And with Dawn of Ys being on the PC Engine, it means it had voice acting. Well, guess what? A fan dub exists of the game, and it is absolutely amazing. I genuinely love it so much. And if you ever play the game, I urge you to seek out the fan dub patch. It feels like you're playing the game in a ventriloque hall with a bunch of nerds who just spent their days playing niche JRPGs and were just so passionate about this game series and wanted to voice it. It's so fun. The recording quality isn't great, the voice acting isn't great, but it only adds to the experience. Honestly, please seek out the fan dub.
Hey man, who are you?
It's been a long time, you jackass. Yo, Adolf, you took your sweet time.
Okay then, very well. We'll take both of you in.
You, the kid with the red hair.
Heard that Adol and Dogi were back, and
Adol and Toki, huh? I think you just mean Adol. I get you. Hang on, I'll wake him. Hey, Adol! Adol!
So Dawn of East is set 2 years after the events of East 1 and 2, and at the start of the game, Adol returns to Minia, which is where East 1 began. The townspeople remember Adol, you catch up with your old friends, and you get to see the lasting impact that Adol had on the town of Minia before he set sail to the land of Celceta. I absolutely adore this, and I can't even imagine how special it would have been to play at the time of release. So with East 3 being a side-scrolling action game with an almost completely disconnected plot from East 1 and 2, I definitely imagine there was some disappointment with fans, like, oh man, I just wanted more bumping. Oh man, I wanted to see my babe Lilia again. And then East 4 comes out. You audibly unclick the game disc from its case with a kashlik. You place the East 4 Dawn of East into your PC Engine CD-ROM, the superior gaming machine compared to that trash Super Famicom. The game launches. You're in Minia again. You see Lilia and you audibly gasp inwards. I'm home, you say. This is East. Like hell, I didn't even know this series existed until 2012, and the opening of Dawn of East still put the goofiest grin on my face playing it. Gameplay wise, Dawn of East is the last game to use the bump combat, meaning it's in its most refined state. There's that word again, refined, I can't stop saying it. But god, it's so much fun to play. Like, I can understand playing through the original East 1 and 2 and not even ever understanding how to properly damage an enemy. Like, there's no real good player feedback, you don't know what you're doing right, wrong. But in Dawn of East, the feedback the player gets is much more obvious, like you know when you've played well. And it makes successful encounters like that much more satisfying. The game also has a magic system which feels much more balanced than that of East 2's, and it doesn't detract from the fun of the bump either. The game is fun all the way up to and including the credits. And the credits are actually, interestingly enough, one of the most memorable parts of the game. It has you walking around a castle filled with the sprites of monsters and characters from the game, and they're all stand-ins for the staff at Hudson and Falcom that worked on the game. It makes the game feel so human. I think more games should do this kind of thing because the people who develop games, like, they deserve the recognition, and it helps me as a player connect to the game on like an almost personal level. For a game as good as Dawn of East was, it kinda got done dirty. So in 2003, after 8 years without an East game at all, Falcom returned with East 6, the Ark of Napishtim, and the game tried to tie the lore of the series together. During the planning stages of East 6, the Falcom developers said that they sat down and kinda mapped out the future of East. They wanted to make East feel more like a series rather than a collection of individual games. To do this, they started retconning lore into the remakes of previous games, and essentially rewriting the East canon. So fast forward a few years from there, and the current canonical remake of East 4 is 2012's Memories of Celceta, which is just, it's an okay game. It seems mostly based on Tonkin House's Mask of the Sun, rather than Hudson Soft's superior Dawn of East. They did make Dawn of East available on the PlayStation Network in Japan, which is very, very cool, but I'd love for Dawn of East to get the East 1 and 2 Chronicles treatment. A faithful remake that puts the game onto modern systems and, you know, adds a couple cool little things for fans. But even without a remake, the game easily holds up the best out of any of the pre-Millennium East games. You don't instantly feel the age of the game like you do if you play East 1, 2, 3, or 5. And if there's only one Retro East game that I could recommend you to play, it's this one by the longest of margins. Number 2. East, the Oath in Felghana. Oath in Felghana is a remake of East 3, Wanderers from East, and it might just be the greatest remake of any game that I've ever played. Not only East. The original story, which serves as a good standalone plot that pulls you into the world, is still intact, but Falcom have retconned in more elements that help connect Felghana to the other Ys games. The game starts with Adol and Dogi sailing to Dogi's hometown, Felghana. It takes place 3 years after Ys 1 and 2, marking the 3rd anniversary of Adol and Dogi's relationship, and placing it after Ys 4 in the story timeline. The gameplay of Oath in Felghana makes several improvements over the previously released Napishtim, and it works to make the game even faster again. They added rewards for staying in combat, with enemies dropping stat boosting items that are instantly used on pickup, stack with each other, but time out after a short while. It really makes you want to keep blasting through locations, which is where Ys games always shine the best. I think Ys Origin only improved on this combat style further, but what puts Felghana above Origin for me is the physical location of things. So Origin was all contained within one tower, and they did a good job at having varied environments, but Felghana lets us move outside. It gives us a nice JRPG feeling village that we revisit multiple times over the course of the game, with the residents dishing out side quests and their dialogue changing to react to events that are happening in the world. It lets us take a wrong turn in the overworld and walk into an obstacle that we're not ready to overcome. We go into underground mines, across the sea, up into snow-peaked mountains. It gives us this sense of adventure similar to that in Ys 1 and 2 that kind of lacks a little in Ys Origin. The dungeons are designed around the Ys keep it fast mentality. Progression is quite linear and there are no real mazes to get lost in, so if Ys 2's Solomon's Shrine destroyed you, you can relax here. You can still miss things if you're not paying attention, and they reward the player for paying extra attention. Remember that funny looking thing in the first area that you couldn't reach? Head back there now that you've got this item that lets you. But it doesn't necessarily punish a player that doesn't pay enough attention. The bosses are, again, fantastic, and I think the 3 games built on this engine, Napishtim, Felghana, and Origin, still hold the greatest boss fights even compared with the modern games. The final boss of Oath in Felghana lives in my head rent-free. When I'm sleep deprived and staring off into space at my desk at work, I can visually see the final boss's patterns in my head. I see him. I hear him. Galbalan. Number 1. Ys 1 and 2 Chronicles Plus. I promise I'm not cheating by having 2 games as my number 1 pick. Okay? The game has consistently been released together as early as the 1990 Turbografx version. Ys 1's full name is actually Ys Ancient Ys Vanished, where Ys 2 is Ys Ancient Ys Vanished, the final chapter. Ys 2 takes place immediately after Ys 1, and the books you collect in Ys 1 carry over to your inventory in Ys 2. Depending on what version you're playing, your stats and XP carry over too. Okay, so shut up. It's not cheating. Although, even if I had to separate them, Ys 2 might be here in the number 1 position in and of itself. Or maybe it would replace Dawn of Ys at number 3 and bump Dawn and Felghana. Like, I don't know. Shut up. It's not cheating. I'm not a cheater. Shut up. Ys 1 and 2 have seen so many ports and remakes over the years, and one of the most important being the 1989 PC Engine release. It was among the first games to be released onto CD-ROM, and it was a huge technical leap forward for the time. Picture this. The Super Nintendo hadn't even released yet. The most popular video game in Japan in 1989 was Super Mario Bros. 3. You're sitting in your living room at home playing Mario 3 and you're having the time of your life. I mean, what a game. You can hear your mum calling out to you, but you just ignore it. The game is too much fun. Her yells get louder, so you just give in and you see what she wants. It's your best mate Kenta. He's calling you up on the landline. Yo, dude. I just got this new game. Dude, you gotta come over. Kenta somehow manages to get you to walk away from Mario 3, down the apartment stairs, and up the block to his house. You quickly stop by the convenience store and you pick up 2 bottles of Kenta and your favorite drink, Pocari Sweat. You arrive and ring the bell. Kenta's mum answers and says Kenta's waiting for you. You know exactly where to go. This is basically your second house. You take a detour by the kitchen and say a quick hello to Pochi, their cute little Shiba Inu that they have, before darting up the stairs to Kenta's room. The lucky little shit had a TV in his own room. You just open the door without knocking and there it is, on the TV before your eyes. Ys 1 and 2 on the PC Engine CD-ROM. How do you even go home after that? How do you go home and turn on Super Mario Bros. 3 and not feel a little disappointed? It's not to shit on Mario 3 at all, because that's a fantastic game. I still think it holds up to today. But it's just to illustrate how amazing Ys Books 1 and 2 were for the time. And that marvel somehow still feels special to me as someone who played that version of the game for the first time merely a couple years ago. Other important versions of Ys 1 and 2 over the years that led to Chronicles Plus being as great as it is are 1997's Ys Eternal for Windows, which updated the graphics and added FMV cutscenes. Then there's 2001's Ys Complete, again for Windows, which rewrote existing dialogue, added flavor dialogue, and expanded the game with new difficulty modes. There's 2003's Ys Eternal Story on the PS2, which added a combo system and some extra content. And there's also 2008's Nintendo DS version, which added 8-directional movement. It put the game onto a portable system for the first time, added optional stylus controls, and it added a whole extra area and equipment to gather, which still remains exclusive to the DS version. And on top of everything else, it received a new English translation handled by Atlas. Like, if you can't tell, I'm quite a fan of the DS port. I think it's wonderful. Continuing on, there's the 2009 Ys Chronicles on the PSP, which ported the complete edition onto the PSP and added an entirely new soundtrack, which was a rework of the original soundtrack but on real instruments. And finally, 2013's Chronicles Plus, which ties together the PC's Complete and the PSP's Chronicles into one, and I truly think it's the definitive version of the game. Okay, that was too many names of video game systems in a row, I'm sorry, but I think the history of this game, the multiple versions it has, is in part what makes it so special. There's a reason this game has seen so many versions. Like, Falcom are, in the video game world, still a fairly small name and very small in size, so they have around 60 employees today. Compare that to the almost 6,000 that Square Enix has. Yet, how many distinct versions of, say, Final Fantasy VI are there? Is that because the game is perfect enough as it is? Like, honestly, maybe so. But Ys 1 and 2 have benefited from future editions. I think they've genuinely made the game better over time. But how, and more importantly, why did Falcom do that? This isn't Bethesda re-releasing Skyrim to print money. This is a small team preserving one of their proudest creations. The only word I can think of is passion. The Ys series as a whole just oozes passion. I can't help but feel the giddy smile the programmers probably had as they watched their game get playtested. The complete joy they felt seeing the game that they made years ago move on to the hottest portable system at the time, the DS and the PSP. All that, and I haven't even talked about the game yet. So, Ys 1 starts with Adol's drive for adventure, pushing him to sail toward a giant storm wall. He crashes onto the shores of Asteria and gets nursed back to health by the villagers. Adol learns that demons appeared alongside the storm wall, and he pops a giant adventurer's boner and sets off to see what he can do to help the people of Asteria. And, you know, he does good. Play the game. You'll see. But the ending of Ys 1 sees Adol engulfed in the light, and at the start of Ys 2 he wakes up where the light took him. To Ys, the floating island in the sky, which, guess what, is also in peril. Adol's adventure boner fills with blood again, and he sets off to see how he can help using the books of Ys he gathered throughout Ys 1. See, they're connected, it's the same game, I'm not cheating, it's not it is 2 games. Shut up. The setting of the story is immediately intriguing. A giant storm wall, a huge tower ascending into the sky, a mythical floating island above everything. And all of this was in the original release of the game, but it was 2001's Ys Complete, which added the reason this game is in the #1 spot on my list. So Ys 2 has a magic system. You can shoot fireballs, summon a ball of light, teleport around, but one of the magic powers lets you transform yourself into a demon. And as a demon, you can understand their demon language, and it's required in a few of the puzzles to progress. But Ys Complete expanded on the transform magic by adding much more flavor text. So if you're transformed, you can talk with every single enemy in the game. They all have unique names and dialogue. And then Chronicles took it further with Xseed Games employing the fan translators of Ys Complete on the PC to work on the official Chronicles localization. And on top of this, there's now a gifting and friendship system in the game. You can level up how villagers think of you by showering them with gifts, which unlocks new dialogue, and with some characters, you'll even get a special one-off item. It lets you learn more about the characters in the game, and it gives you more of a reason to spend time in the towns, and it all exists only for the players that want to do it. Like, missing these items will not hurt your playthrough, but having them will help you slightly. The gifting even extends to all the animals in the game too. Like, you can go around making every animal in all the villages love you. Ys 1 and 2 Chronicles took a really cool game that came out in 1987, a game that was ahead of its time, and faithfully remade it. They refined the iconic bump combat, they re-recorded the soundtrack, they added extra dialogue and extra regions to explore the world as you're playing the game. This isn't just a tacked on boss rush mode, although it does have a boss rush mode. And it's not just extra content at the very end of the game, it's seamlessly woven throughout the course of the game. If Oath in Felghana is the greatest reimagining remake of all time, Ys 1 and 2 Chronicles is the greatest remake. More people need to play Chronicles and see what can be possible when true passion exists behind a game. Remakes and remasters feel like they're a dime a dozen these days, and Ys 1 and 2 Chronicles is the standard. The example of how much you can improve a game while keeping the game's original identity intact. They're not trying to rewrite video game history here, and they're not trying to cash in on nostalgia boners from older gamers. They've just preserved and future-proofed a game so it can still be enjoyed today. Oh, and also, if you know, you know. It took me 273 attempts on 60 FPS Nightmare mode, and it remains one of the most fun things I've ever done. And that's it. That's my top 5 Ys games. If you've played the Ys games, I'd love to know what you think of my ranking. Do you agree or disagree? Please let me know. And also for you fellow Ysers, this is how my ranking would continue if I had to. At number 6 would be Ys 7. At number 7, Ys 8, Lacrimosa of Dana. At number 8, Ys 6, the Ark of Nepishtim. And all the way up to number 8 in my list, the gap between the rankings is extremely slim. Like, I love these games to death. There's a slightly bigger gap between the next one, and at number 9 I would place Ys 3, Wanderers of Ys. At number 10, Ys, Memories of Celceta, and then there's another little gap here. Number 11 would be Ys 5, Lost Kefin, Kingdom of Sand, and number 12, Ys 4, Mask of the Sun. And finally, if it counts, I don't think it does, would be Ys Strategy. If you've never played any of the Ys games and I've piqued your interest, I think any of them can be a starting point, minus Ys 2, but I'd point to 3 best points to start in particular. If you like retro games, or you tend to prefer playing through a series from the start, just start with Ys 1 and 2 Chronicles Plus on Steam. Or if you really want to jump back in time, you like retro games, I wouldn't jump further back than the English Turbografx release of Books 1 and 2. It's easily the coolest original release of the game. Another starting point is if you like fast-paced, short-duration action games like your Bayonettas, your Devil May Cries, or if Dark Souls 3 is your favorite Dark Souls game, start with Ys Origin. And then if you tend to like the JRPGs of today, say a Tales of Vesperia or modern Final Fantasies, things like that, start with Ys 8, Lacrimosa of Dana, which I think Ys fans might have expected to see in my top 5, but it's not. Thanks so much for watching. I assume most just skimmed around the video, but even that I appreciate. But if you really sat there and listened to it all, thank you so much. This is my first ever long form video, and I think I suck at this because I ramble far too much. But I really love rambling, I can't stop. About video games in general, about music, about anything. So if you've somehow stumbled across this video and watched it while having no idea who I am, come talk shit with me over on Twitch. I play all kinds of stuff and I usually focus on sharing first playthroughs of games I missed out on because I was too busy replaying Ys. But otherwise that's it. Do the YouTube stuff, thumbs up, I don't care. Bye bye.